there's a sentence that captures something most people never speak aloud. They don't want to die, but they don't want to live either. They just want to stop feeling. If you've ever felt this, you already know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, imagine waking up every day not with fear of death, but with exhaustion at the thought of continuing. This isn't about suicidal ideation in the clinical sense. This is something quieter, more persistent, and perhaps more common than we realize. It's about psychological erasure, the desire to simply not be here, not be conscious, not be required to participate in existence itself. Modern psychology has begun recognizing this state as existential exhaustion. It's when the mind doesn't collapse dramatically, but instead slowly dims, like a light being turned down so gradually you don't notice until you're sitting in near darkness. The weight of reality, expectations, disappointments, performance, consciousness itself becomes too heavy to carry. So the psyche looks for an exit that isn't death, but something closer to nothingness. This is the invisible suffering. People go to work, respond to messages, smile when appropriate, but internally they're counting down hours, not toward anything meaningful, but simply toward the end of the day when they can stop pretending. What does psychology tell us about this state? What happens in the brain when someone doesn't want to exist? And perhaps, most importantly, what does this feeling actually mean? Here's what most people misunderstand. Many individuals who don't want to exist aren't actually depressed in the way we typically describe it. They're not crying every day or unable to get out of bed. Instead, they're emotionally disconnected from life's reward system entirely. In clinical psychology, we call this anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure from activities that once brought joy. But anhedonia isn't just about losing interest in hobbies. It's a fundamental neurological shift. When your brain has been exposed to chronic stress, repeated disappointments, or prolonged emotional invalidation, it begins protecting itself by essentially turning down your capacity to feel. Think of it as a dimmer switch that your nervous system controls. The problem? When you dim the pain, you also dim everything else. Joy, excitement, anticipation, connection. This is the cruel mathematics of emotional survival. When your brain is tired of being hurt, it stops letting you care. But caring is what makes us human. Without it, we're just biological machines going through motions we no longer understand the purpose of. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the death of meaning long before modern neuroscience could explain it. He argued that without a fundamental why to our existence, life becomes an unbearable repetition. Contemporary psychology calls this meaning burnout, when survival replaces purpose and you're no longer living toward anything, just living because stopping seems more complicated than continuing. Consider someone who used to have dreams, real dreams, career aspirations, relationship goals, creative projects they wanted to complete. But after enough setbacks, enough closed doors, enough moments where they gave everything and received nothing, something shifted. Now they don't dream at all. They only dream of rest. Not sleep necessarily, but cessation of effort. It's not because they've become lazy. It's because their mind has learned that reaching for anything meaningful only creates another opportunity for disappointment. This is learned helplessness manifesting as existential withdrawal. The brain, in its strange protective wisdom, has decided that the safest psychological position is wanting nothing at all. From the moment we're born, we're taught which parts of ourselves are acceptable and which must be hidden. Crying too much? Stop being dramatic? Getting angry? Control yourself? Being needy? Don't be a burden. These aren't just childhood lessons. They're instructions for psychological suppression that many people follow their entire lives. British psychoanalyst Jung Winnicott called this the false self, a carefully constructed performance designed to show people what they want to see rather than what's actually happening inside us. We learn early that authenticity has consequences, so we adapt. We smile when we're miserable, We say we're fine when we're falling apart. We project competence while internally collapsing. For some, this performance becomes so convincing, so automatic, that it takes over entirely. To everyone around them, they seem successful, together, capable, but internally, they're dying. Because maintaining this false identity requires enormous psychological energy. Every interaction becomes theater. Every conversation requires constant monitoring. Am I saying the right thing? Do I seem okay? Can they tell? But here's where it gets deeper. Carl Jung identified what happens to all those suppressed emotions, desires, and truths. They don't disappear. They accumulate in what he called the shadow. This is the repository of everything we've rejected about ourselves because it didn't fit the person others needed us to be. Year after year, we pack these authentic parts into psychological storage and lock the door. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Because facing the shadow means confronting a terrifying truth. You've been living as someone else. The person you show the world is a construction, and the person you actually are has been starving in darkness for so long, you can barely recognize them anymore." This creates what psychologists call identity diffusion. You no longer know who you are because the performance has become more real than the performer. And this is where the desire to stop existing becomes crystal clear. These people don't want to die. They want the exhausting, fake, performed self to die. But they've been performing for so long, they don't know how to exist any other way. When someone says, "I don't want to exist anymore," what they often mean is, "I'm tired of existing as this false version of myself, but the real me has been buried so deep, I don't know how to find them." They're not running from life, they're running from the life they've been forced to perform. The tragedy is that many people spend their entire lives running from themselves, only to realize too late that the person they were running from was the only person worth meeting. Your brain has an emergency protocol. When psychological pain becomes unbearable, when stress exceeds your capacity to process it, your mind doesn't break. Instead, it creates distance. This is dissociation, and it's one of the most misunderstood protective mechanisms in psychology. Dissociation isn't madness, it's survival. When you can't physically escape a situation, whether that's trauma, chronic stress, or emotional overwhelm, your brain creates an internal escape route. It generates psychological distance between you and your experience. You start feeling like you're watching your life happen, rather than living it. Present, but not quite there. Participating, but from behind glass. The brain essentially says, if I can't escape the situation, I'll escape myself. When dissociation becomes chronic, it can manifest as depersonalization, a state where people feel disconnected from their own body, voice, thoughts, or emotions. They describe it as existing but not living, or feeling like an actor in someone else's life. Some say it's like being a passenger in your own body, watching through eyes that don't quite feel like yours. This is where the desire not to exist becomes most visceral. These individuals aren't experiencing life directly anymore. They're experiencing a representation of life filtered through layers of psychological protection. And that filtered existence feels hollow, exhausting, meaningless. The very mechanism designed to save them has become a prison. Here's the difficult truth. Depersonalization works. It protects you from immediate psychological collapse. But it does so by severing your connection to everything, including the things that make life worth living. You avoid the pain, but you also lose access to presence, intimacy, spontaneity, joy. You're safe, but you're also profoundly alone inside your own mind. The question becomes, at what point does the protection become worse than the danger it's protecting you from? When does the shield become the cage? Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps and emerged with an observation that would reshape existential psychology. When a man can't find meaning, He distracts himself with pleasure. But what happens when even distraction stops working? When pleasure itself becomes empty? This is the existential crisis at the heart of not wanting to exist. It's not that life is painful, it's that life is pointless. Frankl and other existential psychologists like Rollo May believe that the deepest human suffering doesn't come from sadness or even trauma. It comes from meaninglessness. When our daily experiences no longer connect to any larger purpose, when we can't answer the question, why am I doing this? The psyche begins to collapse inward. You've probably heard these phrases, maybe even said them yourself. I'm just tired of existing. Nothing really matters anyway. I don't even know who I am anymore or what I want. These aren't just expressions of sadness, they're symptoms of what Frankl called the existential vacuum, a psychological state where people are biologically alive but existentially dead. They're breathing, working, going through motions, but there's no internal fire, no sense of being pulled toward anything meaningful. Modern life has, in some ways, amplified this crisis. Previous generations, for better or worse, had prescribed meaning, religion, community, clear social roles. Today we have unprecedented freedom to create our own meaning, but also unprecedented pressure to figure it out alone. That freedom feels less like opportunity and more like burden. When you wake up every day and have to manually generate reasons to continue, when nothing feels inherently meaningful anymore, existing itself becomes work, exhausting work. Is it any wonder people start wishing for it to stop? The absence of meaning doesn't just make life sad, it makes life feel like a sentence you're serving for a crime you don't remember committing. We need to talk about something uniquely modern, the way technology has fundamentally altered our relationship with existence itself. We have engineered a new kind of void, the digital escape. This isn't mere distraction, it's what psychologists call passive dissociation, a way to numb internal awareness the moment it becomes uncomfortable. Previous generations experienced boredom, loneliness, existential dread, but they couldn't escape it the way we can. Today, the moment discomfort arises, we have immediate exit routes. Scroll social media, binge a series, lose yourself in endless content, but this comes at a profound cost. Every time we scroll past a moment of quiet dread, we're not just avoiding boredom, we're actively refusing to meet our shadow. We're feeding the false self while starving the authentic one. The digital world becomes the ultimate stage for performance, a place where we can curate a life while internally yearning to leave the stage entirely. Each scroll offers micro-relief from consciousness itself. You're not thinking about your life, your problems, your lack of purpose. You're consuming content about someone else's experience. And for those few seconds or minutes or hours, you get relief from yourself. This creates a strange paradox. We feel everything and nothing simultaneously. We're exposed to so much emotion, other people's drama, global crises, curated highlight reels, that our own feelings get lost in the noise. We become overstimulated, but emotionally undernourished. Hyperconnected, but fundamentally lonely. The scary part? This numbing loop reinforces itself. The less connected you feel to your actual life, the more you seek digital escape. The more you escape, the less you develop the psychological muscles needed to sit with discomfort, process emotion, or find meaning in ordinary moments. You become dependent on distraction to exist, which means you're never really existing at all. We fear silence because in silence, the suppressed self begins to whisper. And if we can't tolerate 10 minutes with our own thoughts without reaching for our phone, is it really surprising that so many people don't want to exist? We've lost the capacity to simply be with ourselves, and being with ourselves is the foundation of all meaningful existence. There's a sentence that captures this perfectly. We used to fear silence. Now we need it to remember who we are. But what if, and stay with me here, what if the desire not to exist isn't just pathology? What if it's sometimes the beginning of transformation? Carl Jung believed that the psyche moves through cycles of death and rebirth. He called this process individuation, the painful dissolution of your false, adapted self so that your authentic self can finally emerge. In this framework, the feeling of wanting to disappear isn't necessarily depression. It's the death throes of an identity that no longer serves you. Think about what happens to a caterpillar in its chrysalis. It doesn't just grow wings, it liquefies. Its entire cellular structure breaks down into biological soup before reorganizing into something completely new. If that caterpillar had consciousness during that process, it would probably feel like it was dying. But it's not dying. It's transforming. Modern psychology has documented this through research on post-traumatic growth. Some people who go through profound crisis, not despite the suffering, but because of it, emerge with deeper meaning, stronger values, and more authentic identities. The breakdown became breakthrough. The collapse became foundation. This doesn't mean suffering is good or that pain is necessary. It doesn't romanticize crisis or minimize real despair. But it does suggest that sometimes the desire to stop existing as you currently are is your psyche's way of saying, "This version of me has run its course. Something needs to fundamentally change." The Japanese have a concept called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, making the cracks part of the object's beauty and history. Maybe psychological breakdown works similarly. Maybe the wish to disappear is actually the beginning of reassembly, where you can finally integrate the parts of yourself you've been fragmenting and suppressing for years. Maybe your soul isn't asking to end. Maybe it's asking to begin, properly this time, authentically this time, as yourself, rather than as the performance others required. The question isn't whether you want to exist, it's whether you're willing to exist differently. So what helps when you're lost in this void? Not toxic positivity, not being told to think positive or practice gratitude. Those suggestions miss the point entirely. What helps is a specific kind of reconnection, one that directly reverses the psychological mechanisms of your suffering. First, dismantle the performance. This is the work of authentic expression, what we might call having a conversation with your shadow. Find one safe space where you can stop performing your false self completely. A therapist's office, a journal, one trusted person, and acknowledge the truth without editing. I'm not okay. I'm exhausted from pretending. I don't know who I am anymore. This isn't complaining or weakness. This is the first honest conversation you've had with the suppressed parts of yourself in years. It's the beginning of integration rather than fragmentation. Second, close the dissociation gap. This is embodied awareness, the direct antidote to the depersonalization that's made you a stranger in your own life. When you feel yourself floating away, watching from behind glass, use your senses to return. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice the temperature of your skin. Count the sounds around you. Listen to your breath. You can't think your way out of dissociation. You must feel your way back into your body, reclaiming the territory your mind abandoned when it couldn't handle the pain. Third, practice radical curiosity. This isn't about finding your grand life purpose tomorrow or suddenly knowing what you want. It's about asking what if, with no expectation attached. What happens if I try this small thing? What happens if I tell that tiny truth? What happens if I stay present for just this moment? Curiosity is the quiet engine of post-traumatic growth. The willingness to see what the new self, once the old one has liquefied in the chrysalis, might actually look like. It's not hope yet. It's something more fundamental. Openness to the possibility that something could be different. The goal isn't to suddenly level life. That's not realistic and not necessary. The goal is to move from, I want this to end, to, I'm willing to see what happens next. There's a profound difference between those two states. One is a demand for closure. The other is a commitment to curiosity, and that commitment is the doorway back to genuine existence. So, maybe the part of you that wants to disappear isn't you at all. Maybe it's the false self, the adapted, performed, carefully maintained version finally admitting it's tired of the show. And maybe that admission is where real existence finally begins. Not the existence others prescribed for you, not the existence you thought you should want, but the raw, uncertain, imperfect existence that's actually yours. The one where you don't have all the answers. The one where you're allowed to be confused, exhausted, still figuring it out. If what we've explored today gave you language for something you felt but couldn't explain, if any part of this made you feel less alone, consider sharing this with someone who might need it. Not because they've asked for help, but because so many people suffer invisibly. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let someone know, I see this. I understand this. You're not the only one. You don't need to have it all sorted. You don't need to suddenly feel better or find your purpose or become a different person overnight. You just need to stay curious enough to see what comes next. Curious enough to let the false self die so something more authentic can emerge from the ruins. Because sometimes the most profound act of courage isn't learning how to live. It's learning how to exist honestly, with all the emptiness, all the confusion, all the exhaustion, and choosing to continue anyway, not because you're convinced it will get better, but because you're willing to find out. And if you're in this process right now, if you're somewhere in that chrysalis, liquefied and uncertain, leave a comment. Tell me what resonated. Tell me where you are. This community understands. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read to realize they're not alone in their experience. That might not feel like hope yet. But it's something real, something true, something yours. And right now, that's enough. That's actually more than enough. It's a beginning. Remember, if you're in crisis or need immediate support, please reach out to a mental health professional or contact a crisis helpline. The resources are in the description below. Your life has value, even when you can't feel it right now. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for having the courage to sit with uncomfortable truths. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.